The biggest difference is with Darkseid is that I believe that they had more of a better affiliate program set up. So Darkseid was able to gain the trust of other hackers and build that kind of trust that when you do use Darkseid's ransomware and their service, that it's going to be successful.
Welcome to Cybersecurity Heroes, an Iron Scales podcast about you, the heroes of cybersecurity. You're about to hear and learn practical and experiential knowledge in our conversations with CISOs, security directors and architects, SOC analysts, and other InfoSec stars so we can become more cyber resilient and safer together. Let's get into the show.
Welcome to Cybersecurity Heroes. I'm your host for today's episode, Brendan Rudd, Community Director at IronScales, an email security platform powered by AI, enhanced by thousands of customer security teams, and built around detecting and removing threats in the inbox. We offer a service that is fast to deploy, easy to operate, and is unparalleled in the ability to stop all types of email threats, including advanced attacks like business email compromise, account takeover, and more. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get into the show. Hey, Bryan, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brendan, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to join us today. I'm really looking forward to get your perspective on NIST frameworks and to share your thoughts and experience around that and other topics. So before we get into the show, would you mind just telling us a little bit about you, your background, and what you're working on these days?
Sure. I am CEO of a cybersecurity company called Xact IT Solutions. We've been in business since about 2004, and in about 2006, we started our path on becoming a full-fledged cybersecurity company. We were born out of an MSP, like a lot of cybersecurity companies that I'm aware of. And really, we saw the need in the market for security. We were working with a lot of clients in regulated industries. And that's where we saw a lot of the cybersecurity starting early on, was in these regulated industries with these, regulators coming in and forcing either large contractors or the businesses themselves to have a cybersecurity program. So we started helping companies several years ago deal with these questionnaires and compliance Excel spreadsheets that they were getting from these entities, asking them about their cybersecurity practices. And it's really evolved from there. And that's really what we're doing today. We're doing a lot of threat assessments and gap analysis and compliance type services, along with helping people out with remediation type services when they do have an event where they've been hacked or they're dealing with ransomware. So we're helping on both sides. We're helping protect, but we're also helping recover at the same time.
A couple of days ago, we heard about another SolarWinds vulnerability. I'm sure you've heard of it. Do you have any further details or advice that you could give to reduce any possible threats?
Yeah, the SolarWinds, I think people need to get to the point where they have to accept the fact that the products, hardware and software that they buy today always has that chance of being vulnerable or having an exploit that a hacker figures out either on their own or with the help of other people that maybe the software vendor doesn't know about yet. And even in the cases where they know about it, like we saw with Kaseya, did they act upon it quick enough before the bad guys could take advantage of it? And we saw a similar situation happen with the Microsoft Exchange vulnerability that happened towards the beginning of the summer. And with this latest vulnerability with SolarWinds, we're seeing another server product that uses FTP and transfers files has now been susceptible to a vulnerability that hackers have been able to exploit. And we're just getting to a point where you can't just put blind faith and trust that these companies have everything buttoned up correctly. You have to plan for and be able to withstand the fact that the software that you use in your business is susceptible to some kind of attack and it could impact your business. Proper cybersecurity planning what we're going to talk about with the NIST framework covers all that stuff. So,
and continuing on the news thread, have you heard any more news surrounding Kaseya, and what types of conversations have you been having with your customers?
We were fortunate not to be affected by the Kaseya attack, so our communication has just been educating our clients on what happened, but then also letting them know that the reality is that it could have been our tools that were targeted, right? And this is why we need to have a good incident response plan and a good backup and disaster recovery plan in place and test it and work on it. And these are the reasons why we do this stuff with our clients and the importance of doing it, because when we don't have these pressing issues in the news and being talked about all the time, it's hard for our clients to understand why we would want to take time out of our schedules to do things like this. And why are we doing this is a common pushback that we get from executives. And being able to point to specific events and things in the news as to reasons why makes my job a lot easier. When these things weren't in the news, it felt like we were doing these things all for naught. And these are the important reasons why we do it. And as more things happen, as more things come to light and are in the news, I think executives are really starting to get their head around what cybersecurity really is. Because I would think if you ask like most of our clients or the people that we do business with, I think if you ask most of the market, most CEOs are going to say that the onus of their cybersecurity is on this guy that they hired or that company that they hired. And that's the extent of how much they think about cybersecurity. And I think that's beginning to change. I think executives are starting to see that this is something that they need to be involved in. They need to make decisions around. And obviously, they're not going to be the ones doing it, but surrounding themselves with the right people that are going to help protect their company is really where we're going. And I think we're well on our way there. My concern is that the hackers and everybody else are beating us, or they're ahead in the race. And the window that we have to close that gap is getting shorter and shorter every day. So businesses really need to take heed, and they need to start doing something right away.
And before we hit a record on this episode, you were talking about REvil. So you mentioned doing some research on them. Is there anything that you would like to share around their business operations, their tactics that people may not be aware of, and why it's important to understand how they operate?
Yeah, we've been monitoring REvil for a long time. I used to call them Revel before they got really famous. And now I guess somebody figured out it's REvil, which supposedly stands for ransomware evil. And they are an interesting group because they started out as a traditional hacking group where they penetrated networks and deployed ransomware. And they've evolved into more of that ransomware as a service, where they offer the ransomware service side of things, and other bad actors are able to get into networks, and then they seek out the services of REvil to deploy the ransomware and do the negotiations and collect the payments and unlock the files if that happens. But the interesting thing with these guys, number one, I don't know if people know, this is news that's happened in the last 24 hours, but their Happy Blog, their dark web leak site where they leak who they've hacked and who's not negotiating with them, is down. And on the dark web, it's not uncommon for websites to go down frequently. I've seen the Happy Blog down for 2 or 3 days at a time, just for normal outages. So this may be that, or it may be something bigger, or it may be that they just created too much publicity for themselves and they decided to retreat for a little bit. And they'll probably be back, because like I see with most of these other ransomware groups, they come back, and they usually come back at the same blog. Sometimes they start up a new blog. But as we saw after I believe it was the Colonial Pipeline hack with Darkseid, right? Their public site where they leaked everything was gone after that event, and it hasn't returned. So we don't really know where this is going to end, but we do know that these guys like to target IT companies, hospitals, and big infrastructure. They like to research their target. They like to go after large targets and ask for millions and millions of dollars. There are ransomware groups that go after small businesses, and when a small business gets hit, they're not asking for millions of dollars. They might ask for 30,000, 40,000, 100,000, 200,000, depending on the revenue. And this group just decided we're just going to go after big fish. We're going to hit big fish. We're going to ask for millions of dollars when we hit. And as you can see with JBS and the meatpacking company, and now they're asking for multi-millions of dollars. So.
Can you speak to the differences between REvil and Darkseid?
The biggest difference is with Darkseid is that I believe that they had more of a better affiliate program set up. So Darkseid was able to gain the trust of other hackers and build that kind of trust that when you do use Darkseid's ransomware and their service, that it's going to be successful. You're going to get paid. The files are going to get unlocked, because that's a big problem with ransomware, where files don't always get unlocked. And then there's people upset on all sides of the coin because the victim paid the ransom and now they still don't have their files back. And there's a lot of that, like, bickering and issues going on between the hackers to make sure that they're getting into bed with the right people, so to speak. And then I guess you have the liability side of things. Like, what happens if this group gets taken down? Do you get taken down with them because you're an affiliate? And I guess there's a comfortability level there of what are the chances that this group is going to get taken down at one point, and then I'm going to have to be dealing with legal issues. Because really, at the end of the day, the first people to break the law are the ones who break into the network, right? And they're the first ones. They're involved in breaking the law before the ransomware actors are. When these things do happen and the U.S. does decide to start going after these people, it's not just going to be the ransomware groups, it's going to be the APT groups too, that are getting into the networks and keeping that persistent access open so they can deploy ransomware.
So having said all that, as the CEO and founder, what inspired you to build an MSSP, and what makes you different from other MSSPs out there?
I felt like, number one, we were good at it. We had the right people. We had the right culture in our business to deliver these types of services, because we do work with a lot of MSPs that don't really want to get involved in cybersecurity. They outsource that piece of it to a security company. And we've worked with MSPs who really don't want to get involved in the security piece. And one of the pieces of advice that I give an MSP who doesn't want to get involved in cybersecurity is just make sure you're upfront with your customer about that, and you don't lead them to believe, or they don't assume, that you're taking care of security for them. Because we usually get involved after something bad happens and there's an MSP who's servicing that particular client, and they have an event like ransomware, and then they find out that the MSP really wasn't doing much to protect them. So just be upfront with your client and tell them, hey, we don't do that, but we recommend a company that does, or we work with a company that does help with that. And then to go back to answer your main question, is that we have a culture here. We've built processes and systems around security that we feel are world-class, and that's why we do what we do every day. We do have the Security Plus Trust Mark from CompTIA, which I checked yesterday, only 40 companies currently have a certification. And what that certification does, if you don't know, is your company is audited by a third party hired by CompTIA. And they come in and they go through your processes and how you do things in your own company, as well as how you do things at your client's company. And they benchmark that against the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. And we're able to demonstrate to the auditors that we have the policies, the procedures, and the evidence to back up that we follow 171 controls within the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Once we were able to achieve that, that really set us apart from a lot of other MSSPs and cybersecurity companies, quite frankly, because there really isn't another industry recognized entity that gives out a company certification for cybersecurity. Sure, you can get individual certifications for your technicians, and there's some other companies out there that are trying to do something similar, but I don't think they carry the industry name that CompTIA does. Those are all the things we put together. It's been 6-7 years of building us to the point where we are today, and we really feel like we can do a great job of protecting companies and reducing their risk. And I'm never going to sit here and tell somebody I'm going to protect you 100% from getting hacked, because Kaseya and Solar Winds prove that I have no control over that. I don't have any control over how good Kaseya or SolarWinds product is written. But if you work with your clients, you educate them, you show them that you have risk here, you have risk there, and if these vectors are attacked, here's how we're going to get through it. And you give that comfortability level to the CEO so that he understands it. Because at the end of the day, the CEO, regardless of what happens in the attack, the CEO is going to be the one who ultimately has to deal with it, has to call the insurance company, deal with the press, deal with the clients. So it's in every CEO's best interest to be involved with their cybersecurity decision-making and framework and really understand what their incident response plan says.
You mentioned you have the CompTIA certification. Do you foresee this becoming mandated across all MSSPs in the near future, something similar?
Great question. I don't know. I know that it will start based on my experience. Just so everybody knows, in 1999, I started my career working as a Department of Defense contractor, and I lived through the government's rollout of what was known as NMCI. And NMCI, just so everybody knows what it is, it was basically MSP for the Navy. They needed a way to standardize support and onboarding and everything that we did as an MSP was what NMCI was supposed to achieve for the Navy. And it took a very long time for them to refine that and get it rolled out. I actually had left and started Xact IT Solutions before it was even a thing. So it was very hard for them to figure it out. But since NMCI and once they did figure it out, you saw pieces of it go to other areas of the DoD. And then you saw other areas of the United States federal government pick up on it. And then MSP became a thing in the private sector. So I would imagine that something like CMMC, which is basically the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, right now DoD must follow the NIST 800, either 171 in most cases. And CMMC is just a new version of that, or a new way of implementing that. And I fully believe that we will see things like CMMC rolled out in other areas of the federal government. And then eventually what we will see is private businesses will be impacted because the language in the federal government contracts are going to state that they have to have a cybersecurity program. And they're going to model CMMC once that gets rolled out and figured out. It's probably many years off at this point, but I do believe that it's going to impact private businesses through the federal government if you have contracts, or if you work for a federal contractor and you're a subcontractor, this is going to roll downhill to you in that way. But to say that there's going to be overarching laws on the books by our federal government, I don't believe so, but I believe the state governments will start requiring at least the reporting of attacks and or vulnerabilities in some way, shape, or form. That's the near term. My hope is, quite frankly, that we have a system through CISA that will allow people that are threat hunters and security researchers to, instead of right now, the way it works is if I'm a security researcher and I find a vulnerability in, say, a Cisco product or a Datto product, I go directly to the vendor and disclose that to them. And I believe that system is broken because that allows the company to pick and choose which vulnerabilities they fix and which ones they don't based on probably revenue and profit. I think we're going to hear a lot about that coming out of the Kaseya breach. I think CISA needs to set up a standard like the NTSB has with automobile recalls, where if somebody comes to CISA with a vulnerability and it can be proven enough to people at CISA Then the federal government puts pressure on the manufacturer like Datto or Cisco to get it fixed. And a recall is issued just like they issue CVEs today. And basically CISA says, look, this vulnerability is discovered. It's been proven. It can happen. Here are your two choices. You can shut down that system, or we're working with to get it addressed. Until it's addressed, here's what you need to do. And if the guidance is shut down that server, like we saw with Kaseya, then that's the guidance. And that's what people need to do and what people need to follow.
Cybersecurity Heroes is brought to you by IronScales, an AI-powered, self-learning email security platform that helps security professionals proactively prevent, detect, and remediate phishing attacks in a matter of seconds, not hours or days. And we have an exclusive offer for our podcast listeners. Discover dormant phishing threats in your organization's mailboxes. Get a free 90-day scan back with a detailed report. Integrate in seconds with 2 clicks via API to Microsoft Office 365 and see what your current email security is missing. Go to ironscales.com/free scan to learn more.
And even if it takes years to come down from government, companies can negotiate the terms on the contract, put more pressure on the vendors, and ask harder questions. So you don't necessarily have to wait for government to get involved.
Gosh, Brendan, you're right. In a perfect world, we would have businesses working together to solve these challenges. But unfortunately, the guys that I know that do these security researchers, who are quite frankly the best hackers in the world, in my opinion, the best of the best are on the good side of this, thankfully. But it's increasingly frustrating for these guys to do what they do for free. They do it really out of enjoyment. They enjoy breaking things and finding things. That's the heart of a technician, is breaking things and how did it get put that back together, and can I put it back together, and can I get it working again? And that's what these threat hunters do. They look for vulnerabilities in software and devices, and they find them and they disclose them. But when they're met with resistance from the manufacturers, that's where the system becomes broken. So it would be great if all the vendors would listen to all the attackers. And we're dealing at the human level here with a lot of these vendors. You're dealing with the same people. You're dealing with the same 1 or 2 people when you report these things. And a lot of times they're involved in the product development, or they're responsible for the security of this stuff. And they almost let their ego get in front of what's the right thing to do here. And I know that with the Kaseya attack, the company from the Netherlands said that Kaseya was working with them and doing everything the right way. Everybody's going to question why it took them to have an attack when they knew about the problem 3 months ago. People should question that, and people are going to question things like that when we hear things like, hey, a guy on the good side of the security landscape found this vulnerability, disclosed it, but they decided to do absolutely nothing. And then we have this huge attack over 4th of July weekend.
Yeah, you mentioned that you work a lot with government and regulated verticals. So compliance is obviously one of your main services and strengths, among others, which we'll get into later. But the theme of today's show was to talk about the NIST framework. And for those working on theirs currently, or for those who may want to review or refresh theirs, where does one start?
There's more than just the NIST framework out there. Like I say, with people are like, Brian, which framework should I pick for my security company? The one you're going to use, and the one that you understand, and the one that's going to be applicable to yourself and maybe your client base that you serve. If you're international and you're not in the United States, or you serve a lot of international clients, you may not want to use NIST. You may want to look at another framework like an ISO or something like that. But really where you start is go to the NIST website and download the controls and start getting familiar with the different controls in each section. Within the NIST framework, you have identify, protect, and then that's the first thing you want to do, is you want to get into identifying your assets and what do you have. That's what we saw with, if you understand the framework, you're going to be able to look at all these attacks and that they didn't do that here and they didn't do that there. And you're going to be able to see the fundamental things that companies didn't do when they call these things sophisticated cyber attacks. They're really not sophisticated. I have yet to see one that is sophisticated. If you think that getting someone to click on a phishing email is a sophisticated attack, I have news for you. It's not. So like we saw with Colonial Pipeline, they failed to identify that they had this like rogue or legacy VPN device out there that was allowing people to connect into their network. So that once you understand like all these different levels of the framework, you'll start to understand like what they mean, how it all fits together, and understand that the framework helps you protect information, but also it helps you deal with the fact that if you do have an event or you do have a breach, then it allows you, which are the last two things, are respond and recover. So how do you respond to an event after you detect it? So we're talking about identify, protect, detect. We have to know that somebody's in our system. How do we do that? And then respond, right? We got to respond to the event, get them out before they deploy ransomware, or maybe we're dealing with ransomware at this point. How do we respond to that? And then how do we get on and how do we recover? And it covers all those areas that will get a business through a cyber attack. You know, the whole goal is to prevent, but we know we can't prevent everything. So how do we get through it? And that's the whole entire framework spells that out for you. And it allows you to customize it to your business or to any business. It's a framework and you put up the walls, you paint the walls, you put on the wallpaper, you make it yours. They give you the framework and it's been refined. It was created over a decade ago. It's been refined in that time. There's really smart cybersecurity people who put a lot of time and effort into building and revising this. So it's something that everybody should be embracing and everybody should be using. But step one would be download it, understand the components of it. And once you start to get an understanding at a high level, then you can start peeling back the layers of the onion and really diving in and applying it to your business. Yeah. The controls within all the frameworks are very similar, are very close. Some of them dive off into more specific areas depending on industry and regulation, and may use different languages. But ultimately, at the end of the day, when you boil it down, every framework that I've looked at pretty much looks at it and handles it the same.
And you mentioned that the framework was created decades ago and you haven't seen sophisticated cyber attacks today. Is that because the attackers don't need to be sophisticated?
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head. They don't. When you have things like Kaseya happening, when we find out a week later that they were using ASP classic code in what was attacked. Now, anybody who's a programmer, I used to program for the Navy, for the Department of Defense back in 1999. I quit in 2004. I was developing an ASP Classic, and in the last 2 years I was there, in 2002 to 2004, we were rewriting everything in the .NET. So I stopped using ASP Classic in 2002. And we're talking 20 years later, 19 years later, Kaseya is using the same code base that I used 19 years ago that's been deprecated for a very long time. And everybody wants to think that these things are born out of some genius sitting in Russia somewhere who knows how to figure out everything. And when we boil it down and we really find out what happened, we just see that the fundamental things that companies should be doing for cybersecurity are getting missed, or they're not being done at all. And that's what cyber attackers are taking advantage of. We're not talking about they're hiring super geniuses who would make $1 million a year if they were hired by a tech company or something like that. We're talking about guys that know how to look for things that are fundamental mistakes, and they go after it. And in almost every case, we see fundamental mistakes being made around password reuse, not using complex enough passwords, not providing companies not providing their employees with security and awareness training, multi-factor authentication not being used where it should be being used. These are like the main things that we see when attacks happen. Just going back to Kaseya for a minute, as a software company, the fact that they're using 20-year-old code in present day, that's got to stop. Like, that can't be something that goes on in the world. So anybody out there who's developing software, and I can think of a few off the top of my head that I know of that use old code bases, just please don't do that and don't put your customers in that position.
Would you say that governments get the basics down better?
My view of the sophistication of the way you described attacks is this. The term sophisticated to me means that they are sophisticated in the way that they operate once they have access to a network. So I would say that the less sophisticated ones, their number one goal is to make money and to deploy ransomware, and that's how they do it. And exfiltrate data to use double extortion as leverage. The nation state hackers obviously are there to collect information, spy, what have you. They don't really reveal themselves. Doesn't mean that their method and their vector for the way that they got in was sophisticated, because a lot of times it's through a phishing email or a link or a password that they were able to crack somewhere. So the sophistication for me is what they do once they're in. Do they reveal themselves, or do they continue to work and hide themselves? With the first SolarWinds attack, I think we saw a level of sophistication, them hiding and being able to plant code into the code base of SolarWinds and not letting them really anyone know that they were there. And we didn't see ransomware get deployed in that initial SolarWinds attack. We just knew that a lot of companies were compromised and had this hole, and these actors were able to get in. Really, the sophistication for me is whether they deploy ransomware or not, and whether they are doing this for money or they're doing it for other reasons.
And to end off on the NIST framework, would one have to follow the guidelines chronologically, or can you do what you can?
Sure. When you look at the NIST framework, they have what's called NIST 800, and there's a dash, and then there's a number after that. And that number represents the number of controls that your company adheres to. At present, the highest number is 171. That is expanding a little bit as they revise it. The minimum controls that we recommend are what's known as NIST 853. And that's basically 53 controls that you will address and follow that will help your company become, more cyber resilient, as we like to call it, instead of using a term like cybersecurity. Yes, we want to reduce the risk, but what happens if we get attacked? So we have to be resilient as a business and be able to continue to operate. And the nice thing about the NIST framework, it doesn't cover cyber attacks. It's going to help your business through natural disaster, anything that might affect your business, pandemics, things like that. The NIST framework, if you start to follow it and implement it, will help you through really any event that can happen in your business. And it will help you to continue to operate, which I think is the goal here, because we're seeing so many supply chain type attacks. And if you're a business that supplies something to somebody, you really don't want your business interrupted to the point where you can't deliver your products or services.
And as an MSSP, what misconceptions would you like to address, particularly around, is an MSSP right for me?
Well, one of the things that I think people who don't know view cybersecurity as, they view what we do as expensive, right? And a lot of business owners that I have conversations with have this kind of view of a ransomware attack or a hack as something that they can just pay the ransom and then that's it. Like, it's only going to cost me $50,000. So let's say my services cost the company $100,000 over 3 years, right? Why would he want to pay me $100,000 over 3 years when if he gets hacked, he can just pay a hacker $50,000? I don't know one company where the ransomware was the ransomware payment is always the cheapest part of any kind of cyber attack or recovery. CEOs who aren't fully aware of what's involved in a attack don't understand all the resources, all the professionals, all the things that you all need to bring in order to get through that. We're talking breach coaches. We're talking forensic investigators. We're talking cybersecurity people who can rebuild your network. And I always tell people, you can't rebuild. If you have a ransomware attack, you can't rebuild on the same network. You have to buy new equipment. You have to buy new firewalls, new computers. If you can't prove with telemetry that these machines that you're about to restore to weren't touched, weren't affected, if you can't, without 100% shadow of a doubt, like these machines weren't touched, we don't need to, redo these, or we don't need to buy new ones. You have to buy new ones because you have to assume that it was breached. You have to assume that they put a backdoor on that system. And once you fire it up, they're going to be able to get back into your network because of that system being infected. That's where a lot of business owners don't understand that they're basically going to have to buy all new infrastructure, all new equipment, have an expert come in to be able to set all that up and then secure it properly because it wasn't secured properly before the event. And we see, I would say that on average, when we look at how much our services cost versus what a breach costs after the fact, you're looking at paying somebody to protect you at a third of the cost at what it costs to deal with an event. And that's a one-time event over the period of maybe a month or two that you're going to be laying out all this cash. If I say I cost $100,000 over 3 years, you're probably going to pay $300,000 over the course of a month or two to get through an event. And then you're going to really want to invest in cybersecurity after that. And usually things cost more because you've been through an event and you want to take care of more things. Number one word of caution is just, we look at things as in terms of the boom. The left side of the boom is before the event. The right side of the boom is after the event. It's always cheaper to do it on the left side of the boom, 100% of the time. So.
Thank you so much, Bryan. It's been a pleasure speaking with you, and I really appreciate all your insights. I'm sure our audience does too. Could you give us like a quick pitch before we, wrap up the show here on your services and who are the best fits for you as a company?
Yeah, we really love working with clients and if you talk to any of our clients, you're going to hear that we like to work with companies who are forward thinking. They have that security conscious mindset. They want to protect and do the right thing with the data that their customers entrust them with. We have a big client base that have to deal with compliance and industry regulations, which we help companies adhere to and stay within compliance. We put them in a really good comprehensive compliance program that makes it really easy for them to see and manage and understand where they are with things in their business. And really why you should choose us over any company that's out there is we built a culture here where we feel like our culture of, accountability, always improve, embrace change, have fun. And we have a few other core values that really encompass what a good cybersecurity company is made up of. And our people are what make us really good. And we have a fully certified staff. Nobody works on our cybersecurity stuff without a cybersecurity certification. And then we combine that with years of processes and procedures that really set us apart from other companies. And that's something you can't just hang a shingle on the side of your building and say you're a cybersecurity company and compete with a company like mine who's been refining how we do things, how we put our stack together, and how we make that what I call our chocolate cake and how we sell that to our customers is very different than somebody else's chocolate cake. And we really feel like we're the company that built that really well, and we're always looking at it. We're always looking at ways to improve it, refine it. So if you want a company like that in your corner, you should probably be having a conversation with our team.
And what is the best way to get in touch for anyone who would like to reach out or ask more questions?
Absolutely. Just go to www.xitx.com. It's X-ray, IT, X-ray.com. Real simple 4-letter website. You can hit the contact us button at the top where you can schedule a consultation right from our homepage. And that's really the best way to get, and you can call our office, the number's on the website, but that's really the best way to get the conversation started. We always offer a free 15-minute conversation with a cybersecurity expert to really determine if you're a fit to work with us and we're a fit to work with you. And that's really the goal of that call, to see what your situation is and if we're really the right fit for you. Because I tell people all the time, we don't work with everybody, but the people that we do work with, we're a really good fit. And we really do a bang-up job for those companies.
And your LinkedIn, you're active on LinkedIn. If we add your profile to the show notes, that's a good place for people to connect.
Yeah, you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty much an open networker over there. Facebook too. I have a YouTube channel, the Xact IT Solutions. That's cybersecurity YouTube channel. I put a lot of really good and deep information on that channel. Some of my videos go 30, 40 minutes where I deep dive in on a subject. But it's really geared for business owners. It's not for technical people. I break things down. So when we have a cyber attack, a lot of what I do on the channel is break down other cyber attacks and try to relate that to what that means to each CEO and what that could mean to their business, or how this could happen in their business, is really the goal of the channel. And really, my goal on that channel is to educate CEOs and employees of companies, because we all know that employees are on the front lines of protecting networks, right? They can get phished. They can get tricked on clicking on things. And no employee wants to be that employee who caused ransomware at a company and caused the company to be shut down for 3 weeks. So really educating people the best I can is my number one goal. So if anybody's watching this, if you could head over to my channel and subscribe, I'd really appreciate it, because my goal is to educate 1 million people about cybersecurity, and you can help me do that.
Thank you so much, Bryan. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today on Cybersecurity Heroes. And to the rest of you, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brendan. It was a lot of fun.
That's a wrap for this episode of Cybersecurity Heroes. Practical and experiential knowledge on a day in the life of security heroes. Catch our next episode by subscribing through your favorite podcast platform. If you're listening in Apple Podcasts, please leave a rating for the show. They really help a lot. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.